Good evening, Melrosians the world over. I'm Tom Catalini.
I'm Sam Hammer.
I'm Tom Shampoo.
And I'm Mike Miner.
Hey,
Yes.
this is
And
old school.
This is old school, and this is Let's Talk Melrose, a show where Melrosians talk to Melrosians about Melrose. You know what else is old school? I saw Steve Cazella dancing around on the opening video, and he's out there publishing articles on Commonwealth Magazine and tweeting out about how downtown is never going to be the same again. And another blast from the past is right here with us, Mr. Michael Miner from MMTV and Harvard fame right here in Melrose.
Hey.
How you doing,
Great
Mike?
to be back. Great to be back, guys. It's been a while.
Lots to talk about.
Lots
tonight.
to talk about. It's a lot going on in the world and the neighborhood.
Yeah. And just briefly, sorry, Sam, go ahead, please.
No, I was going to make a joke. Go ahead. You go.
No, please make a joke. A joke is
the joke takes priority.
Joke is one. Yeah.
I was going to say it's nice to have an international relations expert on International Women's Day.
That's right.
Perfect. That's exactly
right.
Thank you very much. Happy.
That is fantastic.
This is where you
to
all
me.
thank me for have me a happy Women's Day.
Yes. Happy
International Women's Day, Sam.
Women's Day to everybody out there.
Happy International, National, and Local Women's Day, Sam.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much, you guys. I
Yes.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's been a hard year, but we're getting there.
Yes,
Yes.
it has been, but we are getting there.
And speaking of fabulous women, congratulations to our own Jenny Electric LeClaire and Linda Apple and the crew on the Phenomenal Arts and Culture Summit that happened on Saturday, all day. It was pretty amazing. I was there the whole time.
Yep.
Tom was there for set up and tear down.
Yeah.
But it was great to have approximately 80 of Melrose's self-identified arts and culture participants, producers, consumers who just love what they do and now get to do it together more cohesively thanks to our own Jenny Electric and the Melrose Cultural Council.
Yeah.
So
Here's a picture from that event. There's Jenny leading them
Wow.
in a conversation about something. And she is.
well, there were lots of jazz hands. It was really good.
I know it's jazz.
Conversation about something.
I'm not getting into the whole thing.
The in-depth reporting.
and you know what else? So one of our former guests, Christopher Robinson, who was on a previous show, we got to experience his Lego mastery on facilitating this. It was amazing. So he facilitated a lot of the workshop that day, and we all started with Legos and played a lot of Lego.
As Sam mentioned, I got to do the job of just going to help set tables up and get everything prepped, and then I left and I came back to break everything down. But I had to help Chris put together the Lego buckets for all the tables. So, and he is just an incredible person to just know and to speak with, and he's just got such a great way about him. So that was great to see.
Looked like there was phenomenal energy in the room, and I imagine there was a lot of really good engagement after almost 2 years or more than 2 years of this pandemic.
Yeah, I think so. And just for everybody, just to clarify, if folks are unsure about this, this is an opportunity to discuss how to bring together a centralized opportunity for arts and culture in the city of Melrose, meaning lots of folks have ideas for different ways to promote arts and culture, but this would be an umbrella person or organization to like work with everybody at the same time so that all the things can happen. And then there's some prioritizations, and there's some opportunities for funding and outreach and things like that. So that's all.
I was talking to Jen about this and trying, because I wasn't able to make it. I didn't know much about it, and she explained it as analogous to like the PED Bike Committee for the Arts.
Right.
And that kind of hit home for me, like an advocacy group to coordinate and manage it, because you know that group is a persistent voice and a kind of a political force that gets some things done. Ever since I moved to Melrose 20x years ago, they've been around and they do bring about change in the city. And so it's great to hear that happening in the realm of the arts.
Yes. And great job, Jen LeClaire. And Linda Apple too, and Sam Hammer.
Yes. All right. Are we ready to get on to the news?
I think we
Yes. I think that sound means we're ready for the news. And breaking tonight, as of 7:41 p.m., the Melrose schools are dropping the mask mandate effective immediately. So tomorrow morning when you go to school, There are no mandatory mask requirements. That happened at tonight's school committee meeting. Karaji is reporting live and tweeted that out and put a little article out there. So there it is. Things are changing fast. I was in Boston today. No mask mandate in Boston. We were talking about this a little bit before the show.
Yeah.
What are you guys feeling about being maskless or mask optional, I guess?
I'm excited. I know, for teachers and faculty types or folks that are engaging large groups, it's been tough to teach with a mask on. It's sort of tough to project. And I know Harvard's dropping their mask requirement on March 14th, and a lot of other universities are in the area. And I think there is definitely a sense of relief that we're sort of getting back to a sense of normalcy. But, we'll see. What do you think, Sam?
I think my kids are going to go in with masks tomorrow. I think they're 10 and they've been dealing with a lot of kind of trying to figure out what this whole thing even is. So I think they probably will go in still with masks and slowly take them off. But it's now, I think we're again shifting in our narrative where we just need to be mindful that there will be people out in the world who are still going to be wearing masks, who are still compromised, or who are still with other folks who have immune compromisation. So just to be mindful that we're going to try to pursue being judgment-free, and just knowing that we're still in this pandemic. We're not out of it yet. This is still going to be here. So.
Yeah, I was talking to my 18-year-old daughter yesterday, and at her college, she goes to Salem State University, and they're going mask optional or whatever. And she was like, she's just going to wear it. She's in the habit of wearing it. It's not a big deal, and there's nothing to it for the kids. So I wonder, Mike, if you will find students who want to wear it, but the teacher, again, for the purposes of projecting and teaching, makes sense. Maybe some kind of mix like that.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, for sure. I mean, I know. So March 14th, it's basically mask optional. But even if it's, I think over 100 people, might be 200, but then it's required once again. So it's not optional after a certain number of people are in the room. But for a group where there's like 60 or so, and usually the instructor's up front with a lot of room around them, makes a little bit more sense in that space, I think. But I agree with Sam 100%. I think we're not all the way out of this yet. We thought we were before. And it turns out we weren't. Right. So I think, being sensible about it, is the way to go. What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, I was going to say, I went to Lowe's last night and I did not wear a mask in the store. And there were sort of a random number of people that were, and some of them were staff and some did have a mask, some didn't. So I think it's just now a personal preference, or maybe just habit. You just feel more comfortable maybe. I'm okay with it. I think the science leads the way. And so Massachusetts said, I think if it's 4% positivity rate or lower, then they're going to start dropping this stuff. And hospitalizations are way down from a couple thousand a month and a half ago to 300 now, or some such really low number. So I do feel like, we're okay to follow the science. What do the numbers say? What do the trends tell us? And then it's okay. And then if things change again, then we just go back to it, I guess. But I'm okay with it.
So what were you doing Monday night in Lowe's? Like reglazing some windows, getting some screws? Like what's the project that was happening? This is what I want to know about.
Sure. I put a new faucet on my bathroom sink, and I had to get new hoses for the water supply.
Look at you. That's handyman business right there. Good for you.
When I have to.
Another side gig coming your way, Tom.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, the reality is, if you've ever done this before, then the reality is it's almost exactly the same as attaching a garden hose to your house. Like if that's all you're doing,
Yes,
I can never reach or have the tools and to reach under there. I don't know.
Yeah, you say that, Tom. I feel like that could also go really poorly depending upon how you approach.
Well, that's true.
Right.
But it's one of those things. It's kind of like electricity. It's one of those things where if it doesn't go well, then you know right away.
Yeah, you're gonna know about it.
And don't over tighten.
Don't over tighten the.
I learned that the hard way.
Yeah.
Right. You gotta have that what they call the mechanics feel.
Yes.
All right. So, talking about the mechanics feel, Sam, tell us what is happening next in Melrose.
So the Melrose High School Permanent Scholarship Fund is having a community-wide luminary event on April 3rd. Light your luminaries. And the kits can be purchased online for $25 at the website. I'm going to hit.
You mean luminaries like Mike Miner? Or what do you mean? What's a luminary?
Light them up. You know,
No,
like
wow.
No,
Yeah,
no,
that's
that's
like
brighter than this. So dimmer,
Cool.
dimmer here. No.
the little bags with the candles.
Ah.
We have those in the neighborhood. So
Yes.
the little luminary bags. So they're encouraging people to go buy like these luminary kits. The proceeds go to benefit the Permanent Scholarship Fund. And on April 3rd at 7 p.m., you light your bags all over town. And
There's a hashtag for you.
Light your bag all over town.
Light your bags.
it's $25. You get 10 bags. You can either drive through and pick them up, or you can pick them up in person.
Nice.
Pick them up in the night. Anyway, the information is on the site I posted. So.
And I feel it's important to remind people of this fact. Everybody who submits an application for a scholarship as a senior in high school gets something. Everybody gets a scholarship. Every student.
I actually remember this as an esteemed graduate of MHS. I too was very, very fortunate from the generosity of some donors from that program. So it's good to hear it's still going strong.
Yeah, it sure is.
Yeah. And then I don't know much about these cell towers. Did anybody look into that?
Yeah. Well, what? Sorry. So, what made
So
you
this
add that to the
survey from
list
Paul
with
Rotary.
Sam texts out in our show prep text thread. Anybody been following the cell towers? Everybody says no, and then she puts it on the list. So, where did you hear about cell towers?
I don't even know what. Yeah.
Ryan Williams put something out there because it has come up with these 5G. Yes. So I asked our basement folks that I guess they are putting up these little 5G antennas around town. There are some that are concerned about any residual impact of, the
Health impacts?
frequencies, health impacts.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Not necessarily about Big Brother and things like that, but
My uncles told me that people back in the day, so like my parents were born in 1925, so this goes back a ways. I'm the youngest of 5, but my uncles would tell me that people would get mad at the neighbors when they put TV antennas on their roof because they didn't know like what the effect was or whatever. So there's always anything new is always a little bit suspicious. But the thing I don't understand is like these 5G towers near airports, like the FAA is like legit concerned about this. And is it true? Is it not true? It would seem that there's enough scientific horsepower behind all this to make a determination, but for some reason it's unclear. So
Yeah, they asked AT&T to not move forward with the 5G
Correct.
thing and whatever that was. And anyway, yeah.
so hopefully we'll have something to say next week if it comes up, but
To be
pay
continued.
attention. To be continued. Yep.
Yeah. And then there's a survey. The mayor has a survey
Did
out.
anybody else take the survey?
I looked at this.
Yes, I did
Go
too.
ahead. Go ahead,
No,
Tom. Tell me your impression.
Well, it seems pretty straightforward. It's a survey to have the community weigh in on using some of the money from, I guess it's ARPA money. Is that what that is?
8.4 million.
$8.4 million in the relief funds that came in. It's a lot of money for a city of our size. And so the survey is essentially, how should we use the money? What do you think the priorities are around town? And there's a couple of good points that are being made. And there's a couple that maybe, we could clarify or help make it easier to understand. But generally, I think it's fine. It seems good that we're asking people what they think. Right?
Yeah, it is. So there's only 4 questions. I got it up right here. And, it's just broad. It's pretty broad. What do you think the top issues are? Climate change, economic insecurity, mental health needs. So great. You got large categories like that. Then it asks you to prioritize, to rank order,
That's the one
prioritize
that's tricky,
community needs, which is a little bit tricky, but that's usually a useful exercise to force people to put things in order. I don't know who picked the list. I think that's part of the challenge with something like this.
Yeah.
And then there are types of projects, which is interesting about where it encourages you to choose as many you want. Things like new sidewalks or small business assistance or addressing food insecurity. So I don't know. And number 4 is open question. So it's good. It's hard for me to envision how you're going to tally this and get anything actionable out of this, or are we sort of going through the motions here to kind of do a survey to say we did a survey,
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Mike, thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's good to get a sense of what people think, and on that front, I think that's certainly a valuable way to go, and sort of see what people are thinking about and what they prioritize as important to them in their neighborhoods. And personally speaking, I think what I'd like to see coming out of this pandemic is a lot, some of this going towards supporting our seniors and, providing programming and seeing what we can do to organize groups and activities and things in the community. And, I've seen some really great ideas in, I want to say it was the Netherlands, where you see younger people partnering with senior citizens to do things together. So that's sort of things like that come to mind about trying to really generate community, because I think that's part of what this recovery is about. That's my thought anyway. Yeah.
Very good.
That sounds great.
And then, of course, as I said last week, I'd love to see what the results are, but
Yeah.
we'll see how it goes.
Right. We'll get our own data analytics team on those results. I want to download the CSV, Sam.
Yeah, and then we'll hand it over to our chief data officer, Casella, and have him run some.
Oh, Casella loves that
That's
stuff.
who-
He's making pivot tables and doing VLOOKUPs all day and all night. Yeah. Yeah, he really
SPSS.
right.
renderings or whatever.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Steve Pivot Table Casella. That's
Yes.
his nickname, right? At work. All right.
Yes. So anyway, so that'll be good. So we'll get we'll do a FOIA request and we'll get you access to that. Don't worry about it.
All right, yes, thank you.
We'll get that. So the other thing happening tonight, and somebody's going to keep an eye on, maybe Karaji's watching and he can tell us, but on the agenda was in a subcommittee, the mascot recommendation. So that is being discussed tonight in subcommittee form.
School
And it's
committee
one of
agenda.
the school
Yeah.
committee. Yeah, sorry. So that was interesting to note. It's happening now, so I haven't been following it, but it'll be interesting to see. So I don't think any final decision, but they're talking it out. We'll see where that story goes. We've been following that.
All right.
Yes. One last thing we'll be talking out in partnership with MMTV, our favorite organization in town. The volunteer group called Melrose Together is doing a project for a conversation project called One Small Step. And it is going to fall under the Melrose Reads initiative as well. So it's all going to be communicated together. So the ladies we met with last week mentioned it. But basically, it's an initiative by StoryCorps. Have you heard of StoryCorps before?
Yes.
Yep. Where basically you get people together to tell a story together. Their new initiative called One Small Step basically brings different people who don't really know each other together to have a conversation about each other and their values and any.
Is this like it's sort of like Love Is Blind?
I'm going to assume so. I'm not really sure.
Oh my God, you got to watch season 1. It's fantastic.
Okay.
Season 2 just came out. Anyway.
I feel like I would rather see you give the recap of Love Is Blind.
I'll give you a rundown. I'll prepare
Interpretive
something for next week. I'll get a couple of slides ready. I'll get the presentation, the graphics team on this.
Well, anyway, all
sorry.
Melrosians, that's great. All Melrosians are being asked to participate. If you want, here's the link. You can go register as a participant, and the team will pair you with somebody that you don't know, hopefully, that has something in common, enough in common where you can have a captivating conversation. Then we'll head down to MMTV in the pod studio where we will record your conversation together.
Beautiful.
It'll be spliced up into an entertainment package and then put on a pod so we can all
Sent into space to be
sent
bounced
into
off a
outer
satellite.
space.
Yeah.
Yep, through our 5G antennas and then back into your phone.
I actually want to do this because I want something I say to be recorded forever somewhere in the world, and I just kept in my vault.
Every Tuesday night is
Right
here. Well, but this is different. This is more like a conversation with a stranger. That'd be kind of fun. Well, I guess I have that here too.
So let's say somebody we get some people to sign up for this, right? And so what happens? They get contacted, paired up, but you show up at the studio at a certain time. Does somebody facilitate the conversation? Is there a prompt? Is there an issue you're discussing?
There are prompts. There are question prompts that we prepare people. So you kind of go through and read through ground rules, and then there's a list of questions that you have read in advance that you kind of have answers to, and you just go back and forth about, when was your first memories of Melrose and values, and when do you, just things about yourself and your history and stories, and you just share.
What's your favorite episode of LTMM?
Yep.
Things like that.
Right. And the two
Question
people,
number one.
the two people talk to each other. There's no moderator,
Correct.
and
Yep.
then it gets edited up, I guess.
Yep.
And
Yep.
made into a podcast. I love the local podcast. That would be great. I'd love
Nice.
to
That would
be
listen
great.
in on this.
So-
I tried to subscribe, but I found out it's not out yet.
I was like, do I need to be clear? Yes, I can. It's too late.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious to see, like, shampoo. Who do you think you should be paired? What type of person would you be paired?
Yeah,
with
that's a
that's
great
different from
question.
you?
That's a great question. I don't know. I mean, I'd love to have a conversation with someone who, like, I have no experience of what their life or their experiences are, and the same the other way. I find those to be fascinating because the world's a huge place, and people have myriad different experiences, and you have no concept of what it was like for someone to go through that. So I've always appreciated that. So I would love to have that conversation with somebody.
I'm going to pair up Mike Miner with the guy who does the carving over on what is it,
the
Emerson
eagle.
Street,
Yeah,
right? The guy
okay.
carves the big wooden eagles and stuff.
Yes.
And
Okay.
I like to see what comes out of that conversation. Have you ever seen him, Mike, when you're out running around?
I think so. It rings a bell, but I don't think I've talked to him.
There's a group of
Right,
people.
right.
Yeah, there you
Oh.
go.
Yep.
I think this
There's
could
about
be a thing.
six or 8 or 10 people that have like chairs that sit out by the train tracks right there in the corner of like the end of Berwick Street or whatever that is. And he sits there and he has a giant hunk of wood and he carves it, and it's pretty amazing. Yeah.
Huh. Well,
Yeah, and-
here's an opportunity.
Right. And I would just wonder what he's out there creating things. I wonder what he's pondering
Is it-
all day instead of watching Love is Blind like I am. Versus the My Pillow guy. Why is it versus?
That's a great
I think
question.
I think the pillow guy would get it, quite frankly. But
Yeah.
that's all right.
Anyway.
Yeah.
We should move on. Speaking of
Yes.
global experiences, we should move on to the global
Yes.
conversation here. I mean, Mike is here and he's got expertise in this area, so we're really glad to have you on with us tonight, Mike, to talk about what is happening in the world and what we are to make of it. I think not just nationally or internationally, but also locally here in Melrose too.
Sure. Well, I think, just off the top here, when we think about at least about 2 weeks ago, the idea of Ukraine and some kind of conflict in Eastern Europe seemed distant and remote. And one of these fears that a lot of people had during the Cold War was that this was not something that, was something you strove to prevent at a very high cost and was a high priority. But nevertheless, it was over there. It wouldn't affect us here. But I think what we're starting to see, at least we're definitely seeing in 2022, how interconnected the world is, how much what happens over there directly affects us, from what we see, what we hear, what we understand, to driving down the street and saying, my goodness, a gallon of gas is now $4.75, which is very different than just 2 weeks ago. So we're starting to really feel and see the effects, I think, in a way that in some ways is unprecedented, the speed and the impact that we're seeing.
Yeah.
For
So
sure.
you have so many intelligent foresight or opinions already on this matter. Can you please just remind people why you are so wise and why we asked you to come tonight? You have a piece of paper behind you, but what do you do for a living that
Yeah.
So my I moonlight as a lecturer at Harvard, in between appearances on LTMM, and I teach. I've taught for the last over a decade now, international security affairs, at different levels and different capacities. But this is something I've studied a great deal. I focus on it, I teach on it, and I write on it, and I spend a lot of time. I'm very, very lucky that I've been so fortunate to spend time with people who have been in these positions to do things and learn from them. And I just try to share it with students. That's sort of my natural disposition as a teacher. So I'm just very fortunate.
Nice.
I work with somebody who's from the area, Ukraine. He came over many years ago. We still got some family there, so it's a very personal situation for him. But what he was saying was consistent with a little bit of the reading I've been doing to get up to speed. That a lot of this was kind of foreshadowed in 2004, 2006, so on and so forth. So, as somebody who's an expert in this area, to see it actually get to this point, was that Was that a big, still kind of surprising and unexpected?
So yes and no. I think it was not wholly surprising to people who will follow this for a long time. For example, if you go back to 2008, there was a pretty aggressive effort by the Bush administration to admit the country of Georgia and Ukraine as members of NATO. And part of the result of that was Russia actually invaded Georgia and pushed back pretty strongly, because historically, as I'm sure everyone sort of understands, either directly or indirectly, that Russia and NATO are natural competitors in this space. So there was this defensive effort and reaction from Russia that says, well, this is, you're coming into our territory now. We see this as a threat to us, to our security. And there was, in 2008, there was a reaction. Then go to 2014, which is actually the real start of this conflict. We forget, we think this is a lot of people who, for very good reason, they don't pay close attention to these things, or they forget. And Crimea was invaded in 2014, and the Russians have been there ever since. So this is a continuation of that conflict in many respects.
Yeah.
What I think, to me, Tom, was surprising to me personally was that so many European leaders were so surprised. So Macron, Boris Johnson in the UK, and others, and their governments were surprised. But also, in a more positive light, I was also surprised by the level of unity that we've seen in response. So we were talking before the show a little bit, but what some of the dynamics we've seen in the last 2 weeks are things that American presidents have tried to achieve over a long period of time. So what do I mean by that? Germany sort of paying for their own defense and upping their game to support a European security. Switzerland, as we all know, is historically very neutral on everything. Even during World War II, they were very neutral. They have come out very strongly against this aggression. Finland and Sweden, their public view on joining NATO up until about 3 weeks ago was about 19% popular. Very unpopular idea. Today, it's over 60%.
Wow.
Which is, so we're seeing these dynamics happen that are surprising to me, how fast it is and how some of the particulars that are occurring, I think, are fairly remarkable. And they're going to have a major impact on the world as we know it as we look forward. So that's a long-winded professorial answer to your question, Tom.
A good one, though. A good one, though.
Yeah.
I've always been rooting for the EU, but it's been nice to see the European Union kind of coalesce as well and really take a strong stand and kind of like lead a lot of the charge, at least publicly, on what's going on. So one thing that was interesting that you mentioned when I saw you a few weeks ago or last week was like, first of all, like everybody can't be wrong. I mean, that's just generally how I feel. Like everybody can't be wrong. But you were talking about Putin's isolation and the lack of information and, things that sounded familiar about the people that surround him, telling him what he wants to hear more than the truth. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I think there's 2 or 3 points I'd make here. Number one is sort of one of the big fears that everyone has, understandably so, is he rational? Has he lost it? Is he a madman? And so forth. No, I don't think so. He is rational within the world as he sees it. And it just seems very odd to us, some of the things that he's doing. But to Sam's point, I think one of the more worrying trends that we've seen is over the course of 20 years, the inner circle that he trusts and advises him has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. And 2 years of COVID isolation, which we've seen demonstrated by the tables and the meetings that he's had, leads me to believe, and many people, that it's an even smaller group of advisors that he relies on now. And then the question becomes, are they telling him what he needs to hear to make good decisions? Or are they telling him what they think he wants to hear to do whatever it is that they think he wants him to do? So to me, this raises what we think of as the risk for miscalculation, miscommunication, misunderstanding. And as we, there's this term called the fog of war that happens when conflict breaks out. And what's important about this to understand is all of the older, wiser folks that I've studied with or I've read from in history who have seen war, who have seen things happen, what scares them the most is when conflict does start to occur, you really don't know what's going to happen next.
Hmm.
And to me, that's the part of this that does really concern me and others, is that you can't say for sure what's going to happen next because there's so many moving parts here that could go this way or that. Anyway, so yeah.
And so if that, I mean, I don't want to play gloom and doom here, but I worry about the implications for the rest of Europe. What happens
Mhm.
to the rest of Europe? Does somebody else get pulled into this more directly?
Sure.
So is that a concern as well, that this becomes a wider conflict that involves other countries?
It's a really great question, and that is something that it's hard to actually. I mean, no one knows for sure. But here's what I would say: keep an eye on. Number one is that another surprise here that we've seen is the Ukrainian resistance has been absolutely phenomenal in their capacity and their capability to keep the Russians at bay. Nevertheless, it's a numbers game at some point, and you see the numbers that the Russians have. So if they continue on, it suggests that they'll ultimately be successful, but we don't know yet. But the trouble and the struggles with logistics, with support, with just organizing the Russian military that we've seen has surprised a lot of people. They've proven very incapable, very incompetent. They're losing military generals that, historically is a signal that, something is off with your tactics and your strategy.
What do you mean losing the generals? What does that mean?
The Russian generals have been killed in the last week. And when you're a high up, military commander, that's not usually something that happens.
You're supposed to be protected in a better way.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So it's surprising. So I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that they're not nearly as capable as people had expected them to be. So to me, that suggests they're in no way, shape, or form able to potentially move on beyond Ukraine, let alone take all of Ukraine, which is still an open question. And then, but to Tom's question, the part that I think worries a lot of people is, does NATO and Russia get into a direct confrontation? Do you see U.S. planes and Russian planes get into a direct confrontation? That to me is what would keep me up at night. Because
it's uncontrollably escalates from that point. I mean, this is the thing I'm trying to wrap my head around, because once you get beyond Ukraine, also, and help me with the geography here, aren't you into NATO territory pretty quickly? So so that's what I don't understand, and it seems to the way people talk about it, it just goes to like everything all out, or escalates rapidly.
Exactly. So to me, what we're sort of looking at this moment is, there's a lot of requests and demands and suggestions for what's called a no-fly zone, which what does that mean? It means you try to close the airspace to the Russian Air Force over Ukraine. Well, to do that, you actually need NATO planes to fly over Ukraine, where they would inevitably come into contact with Russian Air Force. And that's the point where things go from, a very tragic and unfortunate and awful situation in Ukraine to pulling in 30 other countries in Europe, including the United States and Canada, into what would ostensibly be World War III. So in the president's defense, and sort of hit the point that they're trying to avoid having to do that, is because the stakes would go from Ukraine and this conflict that they're trying to help with to one that is, much grander than that, and quite frankly, very scary. So not to be doom and gloom about it, but that's why you see the president and Secretary Blinken and all of his advisors, they like the idea of a no-fly zone for what you're trying to do. You're trying to help. But ultimately, the risk that you roll the dice there, it's best to be avoided.
And they even got to the cutting off purchasing Russian gas and energy here quicker than they maybe thought they were going to, right?
They did. It was actually a pretty bold move in many respects. There actually isn't a ton of Russian oil or gas that comes to the U.S.
About 8% of ours
before now. Yeah, it's a fairly low number, but it's still consequential, and also it does further isolate the Russian energy market in a way that, again, the response from not just the U.S. but the rest of the world has been, in my mind, actually very surprising, and it suggests excellent coordination by the president and his team. who I would say are playing a very bad hand exceptionally well.
And the ripples obviously are felt far and wide in many different ways, right? So just to bring it locally, we get our heating, it was delivered today, and it's a whole lot more expensive than it was 2 months ago. Heating oil. We went to the grocery store, and our bill is $20 or $30 more than it would have been normally, and the gas pump is also highest it's ever been in Massachusetts. We were talking earlier, my wife and I, at dinner about the announcement today from Starbucks, Coca-Cola, and McDonald's that they're pulling out. McDonald's is closing 800 plus stores.
Mm-hmm.
And the response was, well, who cares? I mean, it's McDonald's and it's a big company and they can afford to not make that profit. But the reality is that when a company like Coca-Cola and McDonald's take a hit in some way, that affects our 401k, right? So, I mean, I don't have any stake in I don't buy McDonald's ever, but I know my 401k is going to take a hit at some point.
Right.
Because everybody has the ripple effects of that. So it does have local implications.
Definitely.
For everybody here. And then how often can you shop on Main Street if you're struggling to pay the heating oil and all that kind of stuff? So.
Yeah, no, Tom, you're spot on. And I think that the double whammy here, unfortunately, is that inflation and the cost of everything was already going to go up as it was. So now you're sort of seeing this 1-2 punch that people will feel, unfortunately. And, I think the president is going to do his best to use all the tools at his disposal to mitigate it. And I think he talked about it a bit in the State of the Union, was it last week? But you're right, Tom. It's, I think in 2022, you feel the effects of what are ostensibly local conflicts overseas in a very significant way, because we have a globalized economy. We have an energy market that is global. It's not, just U.S. energy. It's energy everywhere is what determines the price. And it's tough, but I would say this: I would much prefer to pay $1 or $2 more per gallon than be out of my house on a train with just a backpack and not knowing if I'm ever going to be able to go home again.
So I was going to say, my family's fortunate to be able to absorb some of this, and it's just unbelievable what you see on TV, the reports coming out and the human stories. Mothers and children, with sick children, have to evacuate out of a hospital and get on a train and try and get out of town. They don't even know where they're going next. It's just it just seems like a small price to pay. Easy for me to say, that's not true for everybody. But when you put things in perspective, I don't know. It's just hard. It's hard to wrap my head around it, quite honestly. So we're talking, about the big picture here with you. We're tying it into local, and then you see these very human stories in this like real stuff that's happening on the ground that is just horrifying, and it really is kind of hard to put it all together and make sense of it. But
it is. I mean, I'll just say this sort of as a last thought on that point is that. I'm very lucky to work with really smart people who have seen a lot of things over the Cold War to today, and everyone is struggling to make sense of this. This is not, just someone who just watches the news every night. This is, very, very smart, long tenured professionals, Supreme Allied commanders of NATO are struggling to figure this out. I mean, this is a lot of people trying to figure out a complex puzzle.
Yeah, and one of the things I listened to a lot of podcasts that are have been talking about. This is the first major conflict that's happening in the age of the internet, and not only obviously the financial front, but the information front that that we're really struggling with. So earlier tonight, I was talking with a friend of mine who's from Russia, who was telling us about her conversations with her friends back in Russia and how the information is that they're getting is different. Very different. It's oppositional to what we're seeing and what the rest of the world is seeing, and it so reminds me of what we've experienced through previous administrations not that long ago. But they're really I don't know how the information wars are going to rectify itself, because those who do get international news or from their mobile devices or from social media that is now finally being able to control itself and stop a lot of the disinformation bots, they're protesting, then they're getting arrested, and being removed from the streets, but those that are still receiving disinformation and just the exact opposite of what's actually going on in reality. I don't know how that ends. I don't know how that gets out. How do we get out of that?
It's a really good point, Sam. And I think, my fear in that is that, not that necessarily the whole world was interconnected perfectly before, but there was a lot greater free flow of information and connectivity. And we're seeing walls erected here now that'll sort of cut populations and cultures off from each other. One would hope not in the long term, but my fear is that we're going to see a lot of these things stay, and that's not good for the future. What I hope we can do more of is support folks in these countries who are trying to protest against authoritarian regimes and repression, by providing great tools like VPNs and other ways to get around some of the harsher, more strict firewalls and level of control that we see, whether it's North Korea or Russia.
So what do you think about this Starlink thing that Elon Musk has got some satellites orbiting the Earth that countries can't control? He can, for better or for worse. But
Yep.
That's a way to sort of bypass some of those things. And I know some have been dropped into Ukraine, but really the place to drop them like leaflets of yesteryear is into Russia to give people access to information. Do you see things like that playing out over time?
I think we're seeing it play out right now. I do. I do. The challenge is, of course, private sector and state/government. How does that connection work? And we'll definitely run into problems with certain governments who won't want to allow that. There's a reason there's one channel in North Korea, right? Like they fear our own people more than anyone else. So, but
if you could sneak something in that connects to a satellite and the government has no control over it, isn't that a bypass that could help?
Or a weather balloon dropping USB sticks. There's lots of ways you can do it.
Oh, look at you.
Yes, he has them all mapped out.
All right. Well, so the other thing when we're talking about not only the information online, but the security of online, and so the cybersecurity stuff was ratcheting up like crazy last year, subsided a little bit, but this is really kind of up to some nation states and what they decide to do next. So our own government has put out a shields up warning for federal agencies and everybody, including individuals. So, what do you think a place like Melrose should do and its citizens to protect from, cyber attacks that might happen intentionally, inadvertently, whatever, going forward?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So the number one thing everyone can do is practice good cyber hygiene, right? So double factor authentication for everything you do. Absolutely. Whether you are government, education, citizen, whatever, double authentication is critical. Keeping your not clicking on the suspicious emails, of course, right? If you don't recognize it, don't click on it. If they really need to find you, they will. Don't worry. But that's where it starts. The front line is good cyber hygiene. I think perhaps the greater question that a lot of us are wondering in this space is, have we not seen any significant cyber attacks yet because they have been stopped or because they haven't actually occurred? And to me, that's sort of what a lot of people are wondering. So I think we'll see going forward. But I say again, locally, be smart about how you manage yourself and your computer.
I think it's unstoppable if they try and do it, and you could be either targeted. So like the city of Melrose may not be a target, but it could absolutely be sideswiped by one of these things. And I read this book called This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends. So this New York Times journalist who follows the cybersecurity. Yeah. Okay. Right. So you've this is in your space, but I mean, like the actual trading on the market of exploits and things is just like very mind-boggling or very revealing thing to see this dark web stuff. So it's just like nothing is safe. You're presumed attacked and all of that. So it's coming sooner or later, in my view. So I think it's not happening because it's not
it
because
hasn't
the
happened
shields
yet.
are up effectively. I think we're pretty weak as a country in this area.
Didn't we have wasn't there an oil delivery down south last year that had a cyber attack, and so there was an oil disruption pipeline?
Colonial pipeline was, I think, what you're.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. There definitely was. So to me, that's the big scare is, what happens if your critical infrastructure gets hit.
Yeah.
So an electric grid, a gas pipeline, power to a hospital. This is a scenario we've looked at before, and then the question becomes, if it's a state actor and someone, let's just say they're in a hospital and they're unable to get the medical care they need because there's no electricity or whatever, when does that constitute a state on state action? And that's where, cyber, as Nicole, I think, has written about, would get very, very scary. Yeah. I know I'm real positive tonight.
I know, really.
Yeah,
right?
I know. Well, the other
It's a
thing is
different
that
show for us.
so in more peaceful times, when the colonial pipeline thing happened, immediately we just start fighting each other. So as soon as anything
Right.
goes, off the rails, like, it doesn't take much to get to stir the pot, as they say.
Well, I think maybe as we start to wind down, that's a positive note to end on, Tom, is that we've actually seen a lot of bipartisan unity with this Ukraine challenge that we're seeing in front of us. Certainly some policy shots and some cheap shots from certain people in the State of the Union, but I've actually been a little more heartened from some on both sides of the aisle when we're talking about, what does this mean for not just European security in Ukraine, but also the United States and American interests. And really, what we're talking about here is democracy, right? This is ultimately going to be perhaps the greatest test we've seen of democratic resiliency in quite some time. And this is the kind of thing that people during the Cold War were fighting actively to prevent. And now that it's here, how do we respond? I think we've responded as well as can be expected, and certainly has gone past my expectations at this point. But it's only been, 12 days, 13 days? Cuban Missile Crisis was 13 days? So it's a long way to go. I think we'll see a lot more in the next week.
Wow. Yeah,
Well,
no kidding.
I'm going to repost the Sunflower of Peace group that's collecting donations and medical supplies through March 10th. So 2 more days. I'll put the link up here. I did see some other folks that were renting out Airbnbs in Ukraine to be able to send money directly to folks who are able to have Airbnb apartments. Is there anything else we can do from Melrose, Massachusetts?
No. I mean, I think supporting Seeds for Peace is great. I think, if anyone feels like they can make a donation, I think it's terrific. And just, if not Seeds for Peace, Red Cross for sure is doing a lot of important work. There's another organization, it'll come back to me in a moment, in New York City that does a lot of really important work in this space with refugees. We'll post it on the chat afterwards. But this is a monumental crisis. And like we've talked about tonight, just because it seems so far away doesn't mean that it's not going to continue to affect us here. So we should do everything that we can to help.
That's great words to close on, I think.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, guys. And, we'll keep talking about this as we go forward.
Yeah, Mike, thanks for joining the show
Yeah.
and just demonstrating, some of the local expertise we have right here in Melrose, and giving us your perspective and sharing all your work and insights on this. And we appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. It's been great being with you. Nice to get the band back together. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Good
All right.
idea.
Speaking of getting the band back together, I feel like we should be playing the Ukrainian national anthem. But the only thing
Right.
I have queued up is our own theme song, so I think we'll have to go with that.
All right.
And Mike, great to see you again on the
Thank
show, and
Thanks,
we look
Mike.
forward to seeing you around town.